We're in the state of North Carolina today. Pat McCrory is governor, right? I don't know where I got that brain cell, but it was back there. Governor McCrory would have to bow to the wishes of President Obama, say, to import an army of 100,000 Guatemalans if the Alien and Sedition Act is constitutional, and there's nothing you can do about it. Now, he wouldn't call it an army, he'd call it, oh no, they're for picking tobacco. They're your friend. Let me tell you, they're your friend. I want to send them there, they're your friends. We need these people. Now, he obviously does not and was never conferred this authority. So this is what the Virginians and the Kentuckians are protesting in 1798 and nullifying and interposing. They're trying to stop executive power from growing. And this is a really dangerous example of an executive power growing. So Taylor's argument, I just think, is brilliant. And I have heard no one make it before or since that that power was never vested in the president, so then how could it be vested in Congress? They can only make rules for naturalization, how you can become a citizen, not whether or not you can immigrate tobacco pickers in your state if you choose. Then Taylor gets into the final part of his argument. He begins his observation upon the second subject by asking if these laws are corresponded with human rights. Those rights are, what are human rights? Freedom of speech, freedom of person, a right to justice, to a fair trial by a jury of your peers. Now, if an alien possessed those rights, could he avail himself of them under the present law? Could a citizen, under the sedition law, exercise freedom of speech, freedom of religion, or which in the last few days it was being called a social right? So under the sedition part of the Alien and Sedition Act, what Taylor is asking is, could you exercise your right to those natural human rights? Freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of a jury by your peers. Now, he's bringing this up because in the sedition law, John Adams is the jury of your peers. If he says you go to jail because you don't like that you wrote a newspaper editorial, you go to jail. That's how it's implemented. So Taylor says it's either a natural duty or a natural right. It doesn't matter. Now, was it possible that religious worship could also be restrained by this law? The right of opinion should be held sacred, right? It ought never to be given up in any one instance. Now, religion is what? Just a branch of an opinion. With what propriety could that range of thought bestowed by the Creator upon the human mind be controlled by any law? So Taylor seems to find that this is a sacrilege for government to even undertake the regulation of the mind of man. Now, what would be the consequences of such a measure if you attempted to do this? You tried to regulate what people thought. Well, we have ample example of it today, so we ought to be able to answer that question. Taylor said, would the consequence of this measure be universal ignorance? And then he asked, is ignorance a good thing? I don't know. Go to people who are not at a Nullify Now conference today and ask them. Taylor then proceeded to inquire whether those laws would increase executive influence and concluded that they would. That they would be by begetting fear. Now, if public opinion were to be directed by government, by means of fines, penalties, and punishments on the one hand, and patronage on the other. In other words, if you swear a loyalty oath to John Adams, it won't put you in jail. Public opinion itself would be made the stepping stone for usurpation. If Congress should undertake to regulate public opinion, and boy do they would be sure to regulate it, so let me see if Taylor had this right. Now, he's saying this in 1798. They would be sure to regulate it so that you would detach the people from their state governments, yeah, and attach them instead to what entity? The federal government. Or as he referred to it then, and they called it the general government, because it was only for general purposes. But the most dangerous effect of those laws would be the abolition of the right to examine public servants. If you can't examine a public servant, if you can't tell your congressman, senator, alderman, mayor, whatever the case may be, hey, I don't like what you're doing, or I think you're contravening our foundational law, the Constitution of the State of North Carolina, or the Constitution of the United States, or the City Council, the City of Raleigh's charter, I'm going to hold you to account for. Well, no, if you come in here and say that, I'm going to have you locked up, especially what the sedition law did. To bring about a measure like this, Taylor said, it would be necessary for Congress first to establish a point that they were our masters and not servants of the people. I would say that that point is firmly established today. Your member of Congress does not care what you think. And I won't say that all 435 of them are this mindset, but the four that I know personally, okay, so 431 of them are of this mindset. Oh yeah, but Mike, I got a letter back in the mail. No, you didn't. You got a form letter. They all look the same. Go to your neighbor's house. Here's a great challenge. Everyone on the same block ought to write to their congressman, all individually, complain about something totally different, and all get together and read the letters you get back from your member of Congress. They're all going to say the same thing. Dear constituent, I, along with you, share your concerns. Believe me, I would not have sought this office if I did not, insert case here, share your concerns.
Here, here.
Or beer, even better. Beer. Taylor said that, okay, well, if you can't question the government, would they screw up? Well, of course they would. Then he makes an analogy. Could a criminal ever be brought to justice who had the power to regulate his own mode of proceeding? So if you can't question, now this is an argument is breaking here. So you would not allow the person that raped your wife, that broke into your house, to go to a court of law and tell the judge, no, we're not going to hear on those laws there. What we're going to hear about me today is whether or not I jaywalked and get into their house. No, we're not going to, no murder, no rape, no. And by the way, if one juror votes for me, then I get off, and you also got to give me $1 million. In criminal courts, we know this. We set the boundaries and the laws and the regulations under which the criminal is to be judged. We presume him to be innocent, or she, until proven guilty, right? This is part of our law. We reserve this right, and we enforce this for the most part across the entire United States. Why doesn't or wouldn't the same principle apply to government? Specifically, why wouldn't it then apply to Congress? In other words, the reason you have to nullify and interpose it is because the federal monstrosity cannot be the final judge of the extent of its own powers. If it is left to judge its own power, then it is always going to find itself in the right. It's going to pat itself on the back, pass a budget the other night, add $1 trillion onto our grandchildren's heads, and declare that all is right with the world. They have just proclaimed themselves as masters. They have just proclaimed themselves as keepers of the purse, not subject to any restrictive power in the people's body, which is the House of Representatives. So they are judging the extent of their own powers. For example, why would we as citizens of a state that's trying to nullify Obamacare, and Bill asked me earlier, well, how are you going to nullify this? Well, I don't know the methodology, but I do know why it's right, and this is why it's right. Why should John Roberts get the final say? He is a member of that government. He is a part of the federal entity, the general government. He is therefore determining the extent of the general government's powers. Would anyone have ratified the federal Constitution in 1788, and the state of North Carolina, to its credit, said no the first time around, until it was bullied by other states and finally caved in? Would anyone have ratified the federal Constitution under the understanding that the states did not have the final say-so or a check upon excesses by the general government? That's what nullification and interposition is. It is the final check. So the Roberts Court said, oh, it's a tax, you guys got to pay it. I find it in Article 1, Section 8. Inspector Clouseau couldn't find it in Article 1, Section 8. Inspector Gadget couldn't find it in Article 1, Section 8. It's not there.